Vice Chancellor and colleagues from University of Peradeniya, and friends and students, I do see some familiar faces. And I would like to thank whoever who's responsible for inviting me. And, but I also must say that it is good to be at the University of Peradeniya, from where my mother and others in my maternal family graduated from. All these people came from this university. I was telling some of these colleagues, I also tried to do that, but they chased me away in, from, what is that place called? Horagol. But anyway, I used to come here very regularly as a child in the evenings in the mid-1960s to walk among the trees that you still have in the evenings with my parents, and also to watch Professor Sarat Chandra's plays. I'm pretty sure I saw Singabahu and Maname in one of these places, probably this hall, that I can't remember. But as we all know well, the University of Peradeniya in the 1950s and even in the 1960s, and today are two very different places. Now, how that transformation happened is not going to be the topic of my discussion today, but it is something that some of us talked about just a little while ago. I don't think this is the first time I have addressed a mostly undergraduate conference, or congress, as you call it, but I'm not sure. I forget things all the time. What I know for sure is that large undergraduate conferences of this kind are not common in the world I am used to. I assume these are organized in Sri Lanka in the way they are, given the massive preponderance of undergraduate education in all universities in our country and the relative invisibility of more advanced degree programs. But given I am not used to such events at this level and have not taught undergraduate classes for 13 years, I was not, and I am still not very clear what I should do this morning. So I picked up this position and decided that my point of departure to be to discuss some of the core aspects of your thematic title of this Congress, that is, shaping the future and empowering young minds in social sciences and humanities. I don't have the foggiest idea on how you may or may not transform the world. So I will not talk about transforming the world. And thank you, for Kumari, for that introduction. I forgot. Sorry. Since I have talked and written extensively about our countries and South Asia's social sciences and humanities many times before, I will draw considerably from these earlier interventions. I don't see any reason to reinvent the wheel when the path along which it is supposed to travel has not changed much. You will see that some of the things I say will agree with what the Vice Chancellor said and also agree with what the Dean said, but we'd also deviate from some of the ideas. But first, let me say something about our intellectual landscape. That is, the ideal of what humanities and social sciences mean in a global sense and what exists on the ground here in our country today. Terry Eagleton has suggested what we now call humanities initially manifested in their present form in the 18th century. Their key role, according to him, was to foster and protect the kind of values for which the Philistine social order had precious little time. That is, humanities were not just domains of knowledge, but were also avenues to build a sense of political consciousness, a sense of collective public ethics. According to Eagleton, what was expected from humanities when they came into contact with industrial capitalism was to preserve a set of values and ideas under siege. And you can ask that question, whether core ideas that should be important to us are today under siege or not. Now, since we are talking about shaping futures and changing the world, you should begin by asking yourselves if we can still understand humanities in this lofty 18th century sense, or has this domain radically changed in our times globally and in our circumstances locally? Then, what about social sciences? What we think of as social sciences came into being from diverse sources within the generality of Western philosophical traditions. But as a cluster of cognate disciplines, the more obvious emergence of social sciences was in the 19th century as a direct influence of positivist philosophy of science. It is from the mid-20th century onwards that the terminology social sciences has been more broadly used to refer to a range of disciplines which we are now familiar with. That is what this university teaches. Social sciences, with their core point of departure, the systematic study of humanity, can be better understood when located in the intellectual break that occurred between the rupture of the Age of Enlightenment and the beginning of modernity. Arguably, it was only when each modern discipline of social science began to distinguish itself from others, one could see the emergence of sanitized and mutually exclusive social science disciplines within seemingly concrete borders. The advent of sociology after Emile Durkheim, separating sociology from a broader and less differentiated body of social sciences and humanities, is one of the examples of this new landscape of knowledge. And I'm saying this because this sanitized and apparently concretized borders separating social sciences is very, very problematic. Because if I'm asked to define political science and sociology and anthropology, I would find it very difficult. I can do it artificially, which is what universities do, setting up departments and so on and so on, but intellectually it's very difficult. But today, when we think of the relevance of social sciences and humanities in our societies, their importance in our universities, and when we talk about shaping futures, empowering young minds in these disciplines and transforming the world, I'm convinced that we approach knowledge completely devoid of a nuanced understanding of disciplinary histories and their constituent politics of the present and in the local and global situations. What I'm trying to say is, when we talk about social sciences and humanities, we look at them as a given, without looking at the kinds of complications that has happened since these disciplines emerged in the first place and were imported to our part of the world. That is, we don't see their complications and complexities. It seems to me that contemporary knowledge production in these disciplines in countries like ours is completely ahistorical and often devoid of a sense of public ethics and collective social responsibility. So, it is this general, broader global historical background, but even more seriously impacted locally by our own academic, intellectual, and political crises that you have got your education in. So, whoever the students are here, I can't recognize which one's which, but you have got your education in this situation of global and local crisis. Make no mistake about that, right? You are part of the crisis. We are part of the crisis. That is, you will be presenting your papers today, that you will be going into the world soon, that you will be trying to make the things suggested in the theme of this Congress happen, but all of that will have to be done in the light of this crisis, right? Both globally and locally. I'm not saying things are utterly hopeless, but it would be a major challenge to navigate these murky conditions impacted by both problematic politics and questionable intellectual practices. But to even attempt any of that, you need to be fully aware that your future life would not be a walk in the park. For me, the crisis in our collective disciplines is a plain fact. It has been a plain fact for 25 years, if not more. And I think you also need to take this as a given, that there is a problem in your disciplines. That is, like elsewhere in the world, social sciences and humanities are in serious crisis in our country too. And they have been for a very long time. This, I suggest, should be your major realization, if not already known to you. And this should be the point of departure as you venture into the world. So let's get it into our head, there is a problem, right, in our disciplines. But in our country, nothing much has been done to address this, except to expand teaching and in terms of numbers. So we have a crisis in social sciences and humanities, but we have addressed it by increasing the numbers of people we get into universities to train without really looking at what are we going to do with these people, right, once they graduate. This has not expanded into theory building, global collaboration in research, and path-breaking publications either locally or globally. The issue right now is that the centrality social sciences and humanities once very clearly occupied in the thinking and collective conscience of national socio-political environments in general in our country are underemphasized and neglected today. In my view, locally, much of this has happened due to two interrelated reasons. So I painted the global picture, now I want to sketch very briefly the local situation as I understand it. First, most disciplines that fall within social sciences and humanities, with the exception of economics, very nice of you, have been exiled into the lower strata of academic hierarchies as irrelevant soft subjects by educational decision makers as well as the general public. So if you say, for example, you are studying Buddhist civilization or Islamic civilization or whatever, you're not going to be taken seriously, however important those disciplines are. So let's face it, right? And sociology is not that far behind, right? But there has been no decrease in numbers of young people we train, mostly due to political reasons rather than economic needs. In many places, economics have escaped this situation due to its alleged direct implication in what is known as development. And to a certain extent, sociology in countries like ours, in Bangladesh, in India, and in Nepal, have been reinvented itself as a data gathering device in poor simulation of economics. That is my discipline. With regard to sociology and social anthropology in particular, this reductionist and utilitarian cloning of economics has seriously damaged these disciplines' quest for theorization, conceptual fine-tuning, and methodological perspectives for which they were once known. In other words, trying to become relevant in a simple utilitarian fashion has led social sciences and humanities to become collectively malnourished in philosophical, humanistic, and intellectual terms. Unfortunately, this is generally exhibited at all levels of academic hierarchies, from young academics' dissertations that I have read to established scholars, alleged classics, where the general tendency is to merely sprinkle theory as the icing on somewhat simplistic empirical cake, rather than engaging theoretically with the data and information and adding to the overall process of theorizing and fine-tuning of ideas. So what I'm trying to say is that we are no longer producing globally acceptable scholarship in these two major domains of knowledge. I'm not saying that for medicine, I'm not saying that for engineering or computer science. They must be doing it, I have no idea. But in these disciplines, we are not doing it, right? So let's get these things straight. Second, people in social sciences and humanities have also not shown any clear intent or ability to disprove this popularly held belief by enhancing their research, intellectual engagement, publishing, and public interventions, barring a very few exceptions. So I think this is what one of these colleagues had also referred to, about the nature of training. I think the Vice Chancellor was saying something about people not being able to do what is right. That comes from this problem, right? In this sense, the perception of crisis and decay, which has engulfed these disciplines regionally and locally, have become a self-fulfilling prophecy dictated by official decision-making bodies, internalized by the practitioners themselves, which means us, by mediocratizing their own practice. As a result, these tendencies have adversely impacted our thematic preferences for research, as well as in designing our courses in universities. We no longer take intellectual risks or undertake what I would call academic adventures, without which advances in any form of science or art is nearly impossible. As a result, mediocrity in knowledge is an inevitable outcome. So I hope that the proceedings of this Congress will prove me wrong, right? Because it's coming from young people. So, ladies and gentlemen and students, what I have described here, though somewhat simplistically, is the contemporary global situation. This, however, is very clearly visible in South Asia in general and in Sri Lanka as well. Now, my question is, given this situation, how would shaping the future look like, either your own personal future or that of the country's collective future in your hands? Because I assume you will be graduating very soon and will be going out into the world trying to shape these futures. How would young minds in social sciences and humanities be empowered, and to do what? As I said at the outset, transforming the world as such is not an important thing to me. But in this scheme of things, it is important that we transform ourselves. That should ideally include all of you and me. For me, this constant transformation of ourselves through both education and reflection should include the following. 1, we need to be critical thinkers and self-reflective leaders in our disciplines, as well as in our personal lives, in our professional work, and in our politics. 2, we cannot and should not be conformists in any of these domains. And my problem now is, by and large, social sciences in our country have become very conformist. I think this is what somebody else was saying a little bit earlier, that people are not doing what they are supposed to be doing in the places they have been installed. In parliament, in politics in general, in higher education, and in professions. But also, we cannot be critical without offering alternatives. Given that you are final year undergraduates, if your discipline have taught you 2 fundamental things, I think you can be hopeful of shaping some part of the future that will open up to you. One is that your training needs to give you some semblance of a professional edge beyond knowledge. So it just can't be knowledge, whatever discipline it is. You need to have some kind of a professional edge, right? Because in the end, people are not going to recruit you to into the market just because you have a smattering of knowledge. You also have to come with certain kinds of skill. If this has not happened, that is, if the professional training has not come, then you have no choice but to equip yourself on your own before venturing into the world. So this is easier said than done, but this is a necessity, right? 2, your training must give you the ability of self-conscious citizenship. That is, to work and live according to your conscience and to see wrong for what it is. My sense is, it is the lack of these attributes in our education that has made us sink so deep in social and political crisis in recent decades. Unfortunately and quite shamefully, many of the people in national politics who supervised our recent misfortunes have come from social sciences and humanities backgrounds in schools or universities, or no education at all to think of. So, I do not personally know if these attributes have been brought to you through your education. I haven't looked at your syllabi. If it has been, then you are well within your abilities to ethically shape the future and empower yourselves intellectually as you go out into the world. If not, my suggestion is, it is your personal business to include these attributes yourself within you, and doing it on your own might well be the best way to do this. At least in my life, I have not depended on my university education in Colombo or the libraries to give me that critical edge or that transformative thinking. I've done it on my own, right? I've gone out, read, talked to people, thought, and so on. I know I have not given you a very happy-sounding keynote address. That is the mistake of inviting me. But then, I am not a comedian or an inspirational speaker to make people happy. It is not my business. I can only say what I can see based on what I have learned and based on what I have thought very carefully for nearly 30 years. In that light, I think I have tried to show you some paths which you may want to take and which you may want to experiment with. Let me end my reflections with a thought borrowed from Abraham Lincoln, the American president of the 19th century. He once noted, and this is important, the most reliable way to predict the future is to create it. So, we do not need to, or we should not even, follow everything that is American, even though some of us may have been educated in that country, just because it's important, right? But it makes sense to you, if it makes sense to you to follow Lincoln's common sense advice, if it makes sense to you to create your own futures now, right? I wish all of you the best of luck, and if there's anything I can do to help you personally, collectively or institutionally as a university or faculty, please feel free to let me know. And this is what I said at the beginning, I don't offer criticism without an offering. So this is my offering. If you want my help, talk to me, right? And thank you very much. Best wishes and good luck.